This video is to introduce the concepts of water for Bio 120. And the reason why we consider water in this class is because water molecules, because of their structure, they have many life-sustaining properties. So if you think about it, what planets do we think to explore when we're looking for other life? Well, we look at planets that have water. And so we want to consider that before we move on and start to explore other macromolecules. So on this slide, we have a chart. And I assembled this chart to help you study the properties of water. If you go to the Blackboard site for our class in Unit 1 in the folder labeled Water, you'll find this chart. And you should print this out, and then as you read in your textbook or find other resources, you should fill this out. Even though we're not talking about these concepts in lecture, students are still responsible for understanding this information. And so this is a way that we can become and practice being independent learners. So to begin, as we start to look at water, we first want to consider its structure, or what the molecule looks like. And if you look at the structure for water over here, you can see that it looks like a pyramid in its shape, and we call that shape a tetrahedron. So a tetrahedron has 4 triangular surfaces to it, just like a pyramid would. And 3 of those triangles come together at a corner or a vertex. So the structure of water has a couple of characteristics to it. First, water is very stable. When we consider that it's made of oxygen and hydrogen, oxygen in its outer valence shell has 6 electrons, and so with hydrogen ions added in, it satisfies the octet rule, which is that there are no unpaired electrons, and so the molecule carries no net electrical charge. And so in this, for instance, those 2 hydrogen atoms, when they hydrogen bond with the oxygen, they now will have, the oxygen atoms, 8 electrons in their valence shells. And so that gives them the same electric configuration as a noble gas, so it's a very stable structure. Like we've mentioned, water forms hydrogen bonds, and so it does this between hydrogen molecules. And so these are very weak chemical associations. And a hydrogen bond is an electromagnetic attraction between 2 polar molecules, or molecules with opposite electrical charges. And so normally hydrogen ions will be attracted to very electronegative atoms such as oxygen. And you'll see that these hydrogen bonds, not only do they exist between water molecules, but they can exist between water molecules and proteins or DNA. And these hydrogen bonds help to shape these other biological structures. And like we said lastly, oxygen is electronegative. It's greater, or it has a greater electronegativity than hydrogen, and so we see polar bonds and molecules form. And so water itself, then, we consider it to have a dipole structure. On one end of the molecule, on the oxygen side, all of these electrons, as they gather, they cause the molecule to become polar, or have opposite charges on different sides of the molecule. So where we have those electrons, we become very negative, and on the opposite side, where we have our hydrogens, we become positive. And so because of these opposite ends, or these dipole structures that we can have these hydrogen bonds form, where we will have the excuse me, negative and positives attract one another. So if we look at a glass of water at the molecules that we have, we can see the hydrogen ions are attracted to the negativity, the electronegativity of the oxygen atoms, and those oxygen atoms are attracted to the positive charge associated with our hydrogen ions. And so This makes hydrogen bonds between our water molecules. And so these hydrogen bonds and these properties are going to give rise to other properties that water has. So two very biologically relevant properties of water are its ability for cohesion and adhesion. So cohesion is when water hydrogen bonds to another water molecule and it holds them together. So each molecule of water is attracted to its neighbor. And what that does is it gives us surface tension. And all of us have seen surface tension. If you look at the background to this picture, we can see water beating up on these leaves. Think about another idea where you have seen surface tension. Have you ever been able to see a leaf floating on a lake or a pond? Or if you've played with water, you could sort of see if you have a little puddle of water, you put your finger into it, the water sort of raises up as you start to move your finger. That's surface tension. The other one is adhesion. So adhesion is the attraction of water, since it's polar, to other polar substances because of the hydrogen bonding. And so water can stick to other substances. If you look at this leaf in the background here, we can see that these beads of water are actually sticking to the leaf. Think about other places where you've seen water stick. Have you ever seen a drinking straw where when you're done with it, there's a little bit of water left in the bottom of the straw? That's because water is adhesive. Or if you've ever had a water bottle and you've seen beads of water on the plastic inside that bottle, well, that's because of water's adhesive ability. This also gives water the ability to have what we call capillary action. So water, as it sticks to another substance, it actually pulls itself up that substance, and that's capillary action. So we want to see how water does this in biological systems. And so to see cohesion and adhesion, plants are a great example, and you've learned about plants in Bio 110. And so we're going to look at how adhesion and cohesion actually pulls water up from a plant's roots all the way up through the plant and its leaves. And when you think about the tallest trees that we have, you think about how far water can travel in a plant. So the first place where we see adhesion and cohesion is in the roots of a plant, so where the water is going to enter it. And so first, what moves water from the ground into the root is a concentration gradient. So water is going to continually move down its concentration gradient. So it's going to be more concentrated outside the root than inside. So water will move into the roots. And then once it gets in there, it's going to start to move up the root towards the trunk. And excuse me, the absorption of this water is going to be further aided by it being able to adhere to and stick to the insides of the root. Next, water has to be able to get up the trunk of the tree or the stem of the plant. And so water can actually keep moving against gravity and moving upwards through the conducting tissues in the stem or the trunk. And so cohesion is going to allow the water molecules to keep being attracted to one another and pulling themselves up the trunk of the tree, similar to how cars of a train link together and keep being pulled by the engine of that train. And lastly, what keeps it going and keeps the water moving is going to be the concentration gradient. And so we've talked about how water first moved from the ground into the roots because there was more water in the ground than in the root. Well, what keeps that going and that concentration gradient moving is that we constantly have water leaving the plant via the leaves. And so that would be the last step, evaporation.